The Powers Project.
Cherie, how are you this evening?
Hi, Kurt. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here with me today. It's great to have you, and I've been looking forward to this since I was told by Robert about you, and I was like, wow, what a service you offer. I mean, I wish I would have known about you when I got divorced. So it's like
Well,
so
thank you.
you're a certified divorce coach and parent coordinator. You're an attorney, and you're also an author of a book called "Should I Stay or Should I Go," which I can't. I always start singing that song when I hear it, and
Is
and
that true?
because I can't help it, those lyrics just stick in your head. So, and you
Certain
all,
generation.
yeah, I'm sure young kids don't know what that means, but and also you wrote a book called "Putting Kids First in Divorce," which I think is so important. Which when you get to a point of divorce and you have people, two people who loved one another, who are just at each other's throats, and they kind of use the kids as pawns. I just think that's horrible. So I'm glad to have you on the show today to talk about these things, because not only did you write these books, not only do you offer your coaching, but you also have an advice column that you give out advice about everything from how to handle the holidays and gift giving to senior citizens who divorce later on in life and stuff. So please, let's take it from there. Where would you like to start?
So, Kurt, I really am passionate about what I do, and maybe the best way to introduce myself is to share a little about how I ended up doing what I do. I trained, very early as a lawyer, and for a long time practiced in traditional fields of law. So I only came to do this work after my own divorce. As you said at the beginning of the show, oh, I wish you'd been around for me when I went through my divorce. And guess what? I wish I'd been around when I went through my divorce. So I think that my experience of divorce with children was that although I had a good lawyer, although I had a good therapist, financial person, good friends, there was a missing person. And that was someone like me, someone who's your objective thinking partner. So there are lots of people who can validate you, even tell you legally what's right and wrong, how the finances will look. But having someone that will hold you gently accountable to the values you said at the beginning, and those values are so important, right? Because what if we feel wronged? What if we feel that we didn't want this divorce, or even if we do, that we should get this, or that our children need to know that dad or mom was a bad person for some reason because there was infidelity, or they think they were wronged, that they're a victim. Well, guess what? That doesn't matter to the kids. They need to be able to love both their parents. So it's my job to hold people's hand and hold them gently accountable to best practices for their children and for themselves, because we can waste a lot of money litigating a lot of things, and we don't need to do that. And I can assure people that a judge does not care, will not provide you that moment of, you were right all along and he was wrong or she was wrong. And so save your resources for the rest of your life. I help people do that every day by getting them in front of competent professionals who will help with those pieces.
Well, one of the things I notice is that you do actually help people even before divorce. This, like your book says, "Should I stay or should I go?" You help them to even say, "Is this something should really do?" Then you help them, if it is, then you help them through the divorce, and then you help even after the divorce, and how to handle things after divorce, because there's still going to be issues, if someone doesn't help them along the way, in like for instance holidays, and then you find parents trying to up one another on who gets the biggest and best present or something like that. And so you come along and say, well, look, and again, I don't know what you do, but I'm sure you advise them that's not necessary, and probably not, the best thing to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So if somebody wants, so we can talk about all of that. At the
Yeah, yeah.
beginning, if someone's contemplating divorce, I take them through what divorce looks like. And most of us don't divorce again and again in our lives. A few people do, but generally it's not something you have a lot of experience with. And even if you do, it may mean you haven't done things particularly well. So let's look at the practices. And one of the things that we start talking about right away is, how will your finances look in divorce? Let's think about it. Do you know about your finances? Do you have a role in them? How are you feeling emotionally? Have you talked to your spouse about what's going on for you? Have you tried some either coaching or therapy to try to resolve the differences? Divorce is not, should not be, in my opinion, even though I'm a divorce coach, the first go to, right? It's looking at the relationship, looking at the money, figuring out what's best for your children at this stage and age. So I really take someone on a journey of self discovery, of couples discernment, whatever they need to make a good and solid decision for their future and for their children's future. That's what we talk about.
How do you how do you get discovered? Like, for instance, let's say there's the wife, and she finds you and says, "Oh, I think we need her." And of course, because the wife found you, the husband's going to go, "Oh, I don't want her. You found her." She's, how do you get two people together who are at odds with one another to understand that you're there for both their interests and not just one or the other?
That's a great question, Kurt. So, first of all, I'm not representing either of them in a legal fashion. I am a coach. So, if someone says, "Hey, I found this person on the internet," or someone referred me to Cherie and I think you should talk to her, their first response may be, I don't trust that." But then they talk to me. And I show up authentically as who I am, talk about best practices in divorce. I try to build rapport and respect. And if that can happen in general, I haven't had a situation yet in which someone referred me to their spouse and the spouse said, "Nope, don't want to work with her," because I really do try to show up as someone who has everyone's best interest at heart. That doesn't mean, Kurt, that I won't talk to people privately and help them de escalate. I do. So if I'm working with a couple, the process for coaching is I spend an hour with each of them via Zoom. I really get the download, the backstory. Tell me all those complaints and all the good things about your marriage, about you, about your childhood, even, because I need to know how they show up for conflict. And then we talk about their children and their goals. After that hour, we have what I call an agenda for success hour. And we get together, the three of us, and we create an agenda to talk about what's going on, what will work for each of them and what won't work. I can be the one person that they talk to together and separately in their divorce for co parenting. How are we going to take care of these kids? How are we going to stop arguing about this? And we work on that actively in session. And sometimes when everybody just has a lawyer and the lawyers start talking to each other, or they're talking in the background, but they say their lawyer said one thing, there's a lot of that. Remember that old game of telephone that probably our kids don't even understand anymore, but with the tin cans where
Oh,
something gets repeated,
yeah.
only it's not repeated accurately, right?
Right.
So that can happen so much in divorce. So I really try to create a safe space to help people talk to each other and sometimes reach out to me by text or email, or we jump on a call privately to say, "Hey, I'm really upset. He did, she said." And then I say, "Hey, let's figure out what's really going on here. What's your fear about that?" And then I try to help them de-escalate the situation, because really that's what we've got going on so much in divorce, is a lot of fear and anger, right? And if we can get beneath that, to validate feelings, to figure out how to behave, most people are open to those things.
Do you ever have fear, like when you do one-on-one, like, if a personal phone call, or meeting with someone, where it would seem like maybe the other side's like, what are they talking about behind my back? Or have that particular, have that spouse go, "Oh, well, Cherie told me, why we were in private." That's like,
Right.
does that ever become a concern of yours?
So I haven't had that problem, and it's mostly because I'm pretty transparent about the idea that you don't tell me your secrets. If you're going to move all your money to Switzerland, I'm going to have to tell your spouse that, right? So I will keep things private. So if you call and tell me your husband's an asshole, I don't need to immediately call you, Kurt, and say, "Kurt, did you know that you're an asshole, that your wife thinks you're an asshole?" And hey, look, if any of us have been married, then we know at some point in our relationship, our spouse probably thinks that's true.
Oh yeah.
So I can hold that, right? And I can say, what's making you feel that way? Let's talk about that. Well, he doesn't want to drop the kids at 6 p.m. and I really need them by 6 p.m. because we have to go to my mother's house and she gets really upset if I don't arrive on time. Sometimes it's hard for them to share that, right, as they go through a divorce with the spouse because we all want to get each other, right? Well, I'm going to make sure she'll be late and get in trouble with her mother. Well, instead, let's agree to cooperate for the kids who don't want to be put in the middle of that conflict. And also, by the way, if you agree to drop off the kids at 6 o'clock, then guess what? She's probably going to return the favor. Let's create that degree of cooperation. So my practices align with the idea, the more we get behind what's going on with what happens in those private conversations, the more cooperation we can build between the family, in the family system, because really that's what it is. It's still a family system.
Have you ever have you ever been working with a couple and you think you're making progress, and then all of a sudden the in-laws from both sides or one side at the start, like, just putting stuff in their ear and sabotaging what you've done?
All the time. And I consider it real world information because I'm only going to exist in their lives for a limited period of time. So although I don't seek that out, I like to know that stuff. I like to know that mother-in-law is going to cause some disruption so that I can understand the pressures that this couple faces, these people face as individuals. So what can we do about it? And I can teach them coping skills. I can teach them conflict resolution with mother-in-law, right? So this is really a family systems problem when we're talking about this life transition of divorce. So what I really try, I certainly don't call the mother-in-law and say, what are you going to do to disrupt the system? But if it comes up in our work together, then I'm going to help them. I'm going to hopefully give them some skills to give feedback to whoever's causing. And we probably shouldn't pick on mother-in-laws. There are plenty of father-in-laws that are a big
Right.
problem.
Exactly. I'm sure they're both, yes. So when you get a couple in there and then one or the other tends to be extremely emotional, extremely hostile, what do you do? Like, how do you handle someone like that, where they just seem like they're not going to listen to reason or logic, and are just going to make things difficult for you?
That's a great question, Kurt. And I did want to address this because some people are difficult and some people have personality disorders. Like this does exist, right? And it's really not about me. So they can make it difficult for me. And my concern is not for me, but for the family system and the co parenting relationship that they have to have. So, what I try to do is give tools to the person who is more cooperative to deal with a difficult person. And these skills translate outside of divorce, right? We've all had that difficult boss, we've all had that difficult family member. So, the real key is how do we co-parent with a very difficult person, for example? Or if we're getting a divorce and they won't agree on property, reasonably and dividing assets, how do we cope with that? And what I really try to teach people is the only one you control in this relationship is you.
Yeah.
So best practices, right, are to show up authentically, do the best you can, but you also get to create boundaries. So you don't have to have the toxicity of that information all the time. You can set limits on when you'll read their emails. You may not allow them to text, but you still don't talk to your kids badly, right, about your co parent. There are still boundaries you set with yourself so that you don't let that bleed over to your kids. And we know one thing about divorce, the data, we've got good data that shows if kids are subject to conflict, it's not good for them, right? Between their parents. They need the freedom to love both parents, even when one parent is difficult. Now, we can teach children how to deal and cope with a difficult co parent, but we do that by role modeling really good behavior, not by talking badly about the person.
So when do you ever talk to the kids alone? Like, if the father says, like, I'd like for you to talk to my kids, but would the wife resent that, or vice versa, whatever role is, where the other one's being difficult, would does that cause a problem talking to the kids if you don't have the consent of both parents?
So I don't talk to children. I allow other professionals to do that. I may consult with those professionals after they've met with the children, but because of my specialty as a coach for life transitions with adults, I am not a specialist in children, and I let other professionals do that piece. So what I would do, and only again with the parents' consent in my coaching agreement, is consult with any professional that is helping the system. And that's where I take the input of people who are qualified to talk to these kids and tell me what they need and what they know they need. And then I share those best practices with the parents.
So it's, I mean, obviously you believe that there can be a point where divorce is actually better for the children than the parents staying together.
I do. Look, I would like to say, and I'll share on a personal note, that my former husband once said that my new profession, really allowed me to support, divorce all over the US. And I said, don't limit me. It's divorce all over the world, man. I have clients in Europe too. But the truth is, I'm not an advocate of divorce. I'm an advocate of people being in good relationships that help them thrive, help their children thrive. Have I seen marriages that I think are better served in divorce, that people have done better divorced than married? Absolutely. It can also go the other way. It's really about people's willingness to show up authentically. And this is really important, Kurt, if I may emphasize this, not be a victim to their own circumstance, which for me really means that even if you don't want the divorce, even if it's not your choice, that you don't disparage your spouse to the child, that you don't act in toxic ways going forward so that the child suffers. Because if they're suffering, you're going to suffer. And by the way, you're going to suffer also because you're aligning your whole future self with something that's no longer a part of your current existence. And that's not good for anybody.
Right.
So we really need to appreciate that you don't have to be an advocate for divorce to understand that divorce happens, right? Sometimes it can be better, and it can always be better if both people are willing to take the responsibility for what that looks like going forward for themselves and the children.
In your experience, what is the main cause you would you say, or maybe the top two or three causes that people end up getting divorced? I would imagine money would be one.
Yeah, that's great that you brought that up. I think a disconnect from money, and this is an opportunity for, and then I can talk about the other reasons, but money is really a critical issue. And I think sometimes what can happen is there's a disconnect between management of money, who's showing up, who has an understanding of it, who controls it. And I want to put a plug for people everywhere. And, you may think it's more a female problem, and historically it has been, but take ownership. Everybody in the relationship needs to take ownership of finances and understand them and have a role in them. Because otherwise you can build a relationship of resentment. Somebody's overspending, somebody wants to save, and there's a disconnect of understanding between two people. So really, whatever that issue is, whether it's money or how you raised your children or where they go to school or the in-laws, if you can't connect with each other, if there's a failure of communication, then that to me is when people start to turn away from each other. So rather than turning inward for that support and figuring out how to be a team, you start turning away. And in my experience, once you do that, unless you can get real support, things like contempt, resentment, and a lot of hostility can enter the relationship. And there's a great therapist called John Gottman who had great predictors of divorce. And it's when those four horsemen of the apocalypse enter the scene that people tend not to be able to recover. And so really it's not a particular issue, but a combination of issues that leads to those things that then can be predictive of divorce. And that includes the criticism, contempt, defensiveness. And once that happens, and stonewalling, which is, a terrible thing when you never feel heard, when you're always shut out. And once that starts to happen, it's really hard to come back from that.
This has been my belief for quite some time, is that I think most of the time people go into a relationship the wrong way. They go in with your best foot forward, trying to present themselves in the best light, and they're not being honest as to who they really are. And so there's not a true dynamic that's set up as to what the expectations are of that relationship. So if the man comes in and goes, I'm the breadwinner, I'm going to take care of everything, you'll never have to worry about anything, and then one day he loses his job, and the wife is like, you were going to take care of everything. What's happening here? You're not doing that. You're not living up to the promises you made. And he's like, well, you could help out, but you never said that. You never said, hey, we're a team, we'll work together. You said, I'll take care of it. Do you think that's a part of the problem, is that the dynamics that they set up at the beginning of the relationship are never, and I don't want to say never, but seldom aren't honest and truthful as to what and who they really are?
Wow, that's a really insightful thing that you're mentioning. And I think it's absolutely possible because we evolve and change over our lifetime, right? We aren't always our most mature and authentic selves when we enter relationships. So years later, we may understand more and be more self-aware. Oh my goodness, I actually need him or her to contribute, right? And I didn't understand what it really meant. I'll take care of you for always. So I think one of the things I also see that can work, rather than talking about what doesn't work to repair relationships, is constantly understanding that we are all evolving and that we need to be able to listen, be flexible and resilient in our marriages to keep them thriving. And by the way, that's asking a lot when you're raising children too.
Right. Yeah. Well, and another belief I have too is that in order for a marriage to succeed, and again, I would like your input on this, but I believe that the husband and wife should always put each other first. Don't put the children first, because then you make the children believe, one, that the world revolves around them and that they're the most important thing. But when you start taking attention away from each other, there's going to be resentment at some point. And I've seen this in couples where um, they do things that are almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like a woman will say, oh, I'm not getting the attention from my husband that I used to get, but not realizing that she's not giving the attention that he used to get because she's putting attention on children and she thinks they should come first. And then what happens is she's thinking, I need to put more attention to my children because when he divorces me, when later on down the road, my kids are the only thing I'm going to have. So I need to take care of my kids, not knowing that by doing exactly those things will cause this divorce to happen. Do you see that to be true, or do you see it differently?
Wow. Yeah. I wonder if you should be a full-time relationship coach because you're pretty good at this. You have a lot of insight. I absolutely see this. And, there are natural reasons that occurs, right? There is that, strong drive when you have a child to really take good care of them. And our understanding, again, of what that looks like and what that means evolves. So one person can really be devoted to the care of the children and not sort of be able to see outside of that lens for a period of time.
Right.
And then the other person feels neglected, right? And yes, I think you're absolutely right. The critical studies about marriage show that you should put your partner first. They should always come first. In the practical reality, it doesn't always feel that way, even if you're trying to do that.
Right.
So I do encourage people to get support on that front. And it is interesting, whether it's generationally or something else, they talk about the shift in our focus on children. It's really happened in a generation. I mean, how much attention did our parents pay to us? I mean, enough, a lot, some not at all. But now it feels like we're told to do a lot more careful, thoughtful, gentle parenting. And that takes time and effort. And it may be true, but how do you at the same moment prioritize your partner and make that so, and do the work that you need to do, and have the house that you want to have, and tend to all those things that were expected of us as adult people. So it is a real challenge. And I find that if people can be reminded to do that, to prioritize their partner, to do things as simple as have, weekly date nights, or to have time away. None of us, I guess, can travel as much as we'd like these days, but to do the simple things that show your partner you care. And know your partner's love language, by the way, because if you're someone that, loves people to take care of you and perform acts of service, that's great. But what if your partner just likes to be told, validating words every day, to be told
Right.
that they're loved, so knowing the love, if you don't know about the 5 love languages, it's a great way to begin to understand and be insightful, not about what you want, but about what your partner may need.
Right, exactly. And that's a great point. Another point to be made is sometimes, you know, marriage requires sacrifice. There's going to be times, whether you're the mother or the father, you're going to come home and you're going to be dead tired. And your wife is going to go, it's date night, and you're going to go, oh, not date night. That's like, but you've got to suck it up, and because that's what you do for the person that you love. And I think that sometimes we think because we know each other, like, well, she's my wife or he's my husband, so he's going to be there no matter what, so I can blow this off. And it's like, no, you really can't, and you really shouldn't, and so I think that gets lost sometimes too.
I think that you're right. And I also think that, we should think of partnership, of marriage, of, whether you're domestic partners in a, love relationship, or, if there are two wives, two husbands, whatever your relationship looks like, it's not an act of self, it's an act of service. And that I try to remember that expression, because for me, it's meaningful. It's really easy to get caught up in what I need. That's for sure. You can ask, my husband. But I think that we often need to think about what is it they need, because often the more you're giving, right, the more you're getting. And
Right.
it takes sometimes so little to see the results of that. So if we can stay in the space of service in marriage, it really helps us, I think, get a return on our investment.
Yes, I agree. And I love that. It's not an act of self, it's an act of service. You hit it right on the head. I love that. That's excellent. Um, Tell me just a little juicy detail. Tell me, like, what's one of the worst divorces that you've ever had to deal with people, like where it just got crazy for you?
Well, I think what can happen more than you can imagine is, if not a traditional domestic violence situation, which we all know is horrific, where you
Right.
have an abusive spouse, but a situation in which things get so escalated in a household that police get called, and one or both spouses can be arrested, right? And then you have layered on a legal process that really has nothing to do with real criminal behavior. People can get in physical altercations, even if there hasn't been a background of abuse. People can get in yelling matches that result in escalation that alerts the neighbors. The police can get called. And anytime you get criminal involvement, law enforcement involved, it really escalates the stakes in a marriage. So what I have seen is someone can literally be diverted by the criminal law system and have to sort of fight their way out of that while going through a divorce or
Yeah.
contemplating divorce. And let me tell you, it doesn't help de-escalate the situation.
No, I
It's
can imagine it wouldn't.
it's a situ it's a situation full of shame. For these people are not people who have spent their lives encountering the criminal justice system, and they might feel embarrassed, they may feel shame, they may feel trauma. And now we have layered that all on a system that could have been, right, a separation and divorce supportive of the children. And
Right.
so those are probably, from my perspective, the juiciest and most difficult situations that don't have to exist.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like what that does to the children to have to experience that as well.
Because often then what happens is one or both parents are not allowed to enter the marital home for a period of time. So they're immediately separated, right, from perhaps the primary caretaker that has to figure out a way to have access to those children. So again, you're just adding layers of complication for the children that shouldn't exist at all. So they're really traumatic for the whole family system. And so what I try to do in the work I do is have people invested early enough in keeping things de-escalated, even if they think their partner is a bad person, has done bad things. they're blindsided, they're surprised, whatever it is, let's take control of ourselves so we can take care of our family.
I like that. Um, Tell me one of the best stories from what you do.
So, people like to talk about this idea of conscious uncoupling, right? And it's sort of all aspirational. And maybe we know a few celebrities who've done it, but I know very few people in the real world that do, right? But in fact, I have had, a couple that came to me that started out very escalated. He said, she said, but he did this, he's betrayed us. And they both got really good support. And dare I say it, coaching that helped them figure out that to take care of their kids and to actually live the life they wanted post divorce, they had to figure out how to get validated. They both had good therapists, but how to act in a really practical way to communicate with each other to take care of their kids. And now the kids are able to go flexibly between households. They have a built-in schedule, but if one parent wants to take the children or do something for some reason, there's a high degree of cooperation. COVID was a real test of that, and still they were able to remain flexible, careful, thoughtful, and they even share custody of the family pet, which is great because that means the pet goes where the children are, which is really what they want. So that's one of my best examples of how you can come from a state of escalation, get the right fit support. They both had lawyers, but they were lawyers who could negotiate to settlement rather than negotiate to litigate. And when you do that, you spend a lot of money, and also people start to get mad at each other again, right?
Right.
So in that case, we were able to really cooperate, continue to de-escalate when there were spikes, when people got mad at each other. We gave them some skills. Here's how you can figure out what's really going on. Here's how you can ask in a neutral way. And that's a really big point I want to make, Kurt. And I'm really glad you asked about the best situation, because there are ways to communicate a question you have, right? Can you drop the children at 6 p.m.? Not, I know you're an asshole. Will you drop the children at 6 p.m.? That are better practices. So I really try to get people to put in information only required. Whatever your thoughts are about the situation or about the person don't need to be included. It's one of the hardest things to teach people to do, because we're all human, right? We all think, I need to tell him or her that thing, but you actually don't. Now, you may need your own support about it. You may need to tell your best friend, or better yet, your therapist, and figure out some coping skills. And ultimately, as a coach, I try to get people so they're not aligned with that person. Because if you're not aligned with that thought, then guess what? You begin to do what I think people need to do in separation divorce: learn to let it go. I always ask my clients, can you let it go? And for a long time, the answer may be no. And then one day there's some radical acceptance of what they can't change. And they're like, you know what? I can, and I'm going to, and I feel better.
Okay. And then that's great advice. In fact, I want to talk to you after the show about something. But anyway, so have you ever gotten to a situation where you have, like, you have the couple doing really well, communicating, and they're being very cooperative with one another with times and things like that, and then all of a sudden one of them starts dating or finds a partner, and all of a sudden there's a monkey wrench thrown into everything that you were able to do.
You ask all the most difficult and good questions, Kurt. Yes, of course. I mean, nothing like a new partner to throw a monkey wrench in. And one of the things I do as a coach also is to help people as they start dating, as they start consider blending families, inserting a new partner into the system, on best practices. And by the way, some of it's trial and error, because we're not, all perfectly informed about how that should go. But one of the things I think that's most impactful when you start to date someone is, how long do you wait before you introduce them to your children? And really, unless the children are adults, and even sometimes then, you really want to make sure that this is a person you consider to be a potential future partner, right? That you might engage in a more serious relationship with. Introducing casual partners can be confusing to children. So even when you do that, even waiting, and then maybe deciding to have a serious relationship, brings up the complication is, how much influence does that partner have over your children. And I think it's a hard thing because the new partner is subject to that child, is around that child once they're introduced, and then may have no voice in what happens with that child. And that can be really tough in terms of discipline and in terms of, ideas they have maybe based on their own parenting about things. But the best practice is really to let the parents, the co-parents, lead the way on that child. And your role should be that of helpful advisor to the child. So if the child asks you for advice, you can give it. But even if they're disrespectful to you, then you need to seek input from the parent, not necessarily the co-parent, but the one
Right.
that you're close to and intimate with, and say, I need you to lead the way on this and help me remind your child that it's not okay to treat me this way. As people who may be used to taking control, that's a really hard thing to do in a practical level in the
Right.
moment. But it actually helps you establish a better relationship with the stepchild, and ultimately will grow that relationship. They may be more likely to come to you for advice because they don't view you as that scary parent or the parent that they can't approach at a certain age. And then you can give them the grace of, I am a helpful advisor. Hey, I want to give you the best advice. And maybe you should consider talking about whatever that issue is with your parents, because actually they will listen to you. So I think it's a very difficult topic. I think that toxic people can align with toxic partners, right? New partners. So
Yeah.
it can cause disruption in the system. But my advice to people is understand that can be the case and understand what you can control. And we're going to give you best practices. And maybe you're the one, if your former partner has now a new toxic person in their lives, you're going to have to help your children know again how to deal with difficult people. Obviously, if you're concerned about abuse or something extreme, there are other steps you would take. But in the situation where they just don't like them or find them difficult to deal with, I really counsel my clients, I really coach my clients to use really good boundaries to teach their children how to advocate for themselves, because really ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is teach our children how to advocate for themselves.
when one or the other finds a new partner, would you suggest talking to the ex and informing the ex, listen, I want to introduce this person who I've been dating, who's means, it means a lot to me. I want to introduce them to the children. Would you suggest getting approval from the ex first, or does it depend on the individual, or how would you see
I
that?
think it does. I think it is an individual thing. It depends on your relationship with your co-parent. If it's really open, I think best practice would be, hey, I've got somebody serious in my life and I want you to know that our child is going to meet them. Like, that's a pretty big deal. If you know that no matter what you do, you're going to get a negative response, then maybe it's just not practical for you to do that, right? So it depends on your situation, but the best practice would be to have the kind of relationship where you say, heads up, this is serious. I think I'm going to introduce, our daughter soon to my new partner. And I want you to know that in case she has any questions. And if you have any questions, please let me know. There's always a place of good boundary, because, you don't get to know everything about that new relationship, right? As the ex. And you want to be courteous and respectful of the idea that this person is going to be in your child's life and their child's life.
So let me just, I know you're kind of on a time crunch. Just let me ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
One has to do with divorce later on in life. How is that different from, when you're in your, starting your family or in the middle of raising your family? What's it like after your kids are grown and stuff?
It's a great question. And, we really do see more of the gray divorce, as it's called, now, because people expect to live full and rich lives, long after their children leave home, which has just changed generationally. But people also are like, I put in my time and I'm ready to go. I want something different, right? So I think you have to think about a lot of things that are the same. Your finances, how do they look? The wrinkle that may be different is, as you age, you're now thinking about your own health and who is there to help take care of you if you are separated and divorced. And do you want to make a plan for success yourself so that you don't feel like you're putting the burden on your adult children, for instance? So you really have to be self-aware and be willing to confront all of those issues. You may be lonely in your marriage, but will you be less lonely as you begin to date in your 50s and 60s? How does that look? I mean, a lot of people will tell you terrible tales of dating, right? Of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Other people will say it's great. It's very freeing. I meet all kinds of people I never otherwise would have encountered. So it is an individual thing, but I think those are the things I talk about with clients. Have you thought about what it looks like outside of your marriage, not just how lonely you are perhaps in your marriage?
Right. Yeah, I think that especially at that age, they probably need to, and I don't want to say need to think about it even more, but they definitely, you can't, they shouldn't take it lightly for sure. So,
But I'll let you in on a little secret. People of a certain age are still having sex, Kurt.
oh yeah,
So
I've heard about the STDs and in that age group are the highest. So, by any age.
well, and I tell people you got to be careful, and maybe you haven't thought about it in 40 years, right? But you got to use protection. Be careful out there.
Yeah, just because you can't get pregnant anymore doesn't mean there's other things. So,
It's
so
exactly right.
so my last question is going to be: so, can exes really be friends?
Wow, you really do ask the hard questions. I guess it depends upon what you mean by friends. First of all, I don't put anyone in a box and I don't pretend to have all the answers for everyone. I will tell you that my former spouse may consider me dead, or is it just dead to him? But in any case, that's I do think you can be. I think you have to be very careful, set boundaries, and especially once you have a new partner, you certainly never want your partner to feel threatened by the relationship you have with your ex. Having said that, do you want a partner that would feel threatened by your relationship with
Right,
your ex? So,
right,
I think in a best case scenario, my parents happened to have divorced when I was very young and were great friends and looked out for each other. It doesn't mean there weren't pain points, just like there are with friends. But I really believe they were both lucky no longer to be married to each other and to still be friends. So maybe it's my own personal bias. It hasn't been my own personal experience, but I have seen people do it. I've seen my clients do it. So I think the answer is yes, with the little asterisk. We have to look at individual situations, set good boundaries, think about what it means for the children. But at very least, try to be friendly for the kids. It makes it so much better and easier for them.
right. Well, that's great advice. Um, so where can people find you who are in this situation? I mean, because again, if over 50% of the people in this country are getting divorced, I can imagine that you probably are pretty busy. So how do
I'm I'm pretty busy. I do like people to know that I'm a good fit for what they need. So I always offer a discovery session via Zoom. So people can find me most easily at deardivorcecoach.com. And on that site, you can hop out and schedule a Zoom session so that we can connect. And then also you can find me all over social media. So if you're on Facebook, there's a group. Instagram. I'm on TikTok now. I'm going to start doing an advice column on TikTok, and we'll see how that blows up, right? My hope is that people take it, in the spirit in which it's intended, which is I want your input. I want to hear from you. And here are what I understand to be based on my 7 years of doing this full time best practices in separation and divorce.
Yeah, and I will tell people that I went to your website, and like I said, I found it the question and answering segment that you had, the advice column. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of great information on here. I mean, just reading that is just, I mean, it's worth your time. Before you do anything, just go and visit your website, and they'll get a great deal from it. So
Well, thank you, Kurt. And it's all free, right? So
right,
get those free resources and read them. And then if you have more questions, ask me. I'm passionate about what I do. I do it because of that. And I want to continue to spread the word that we can do better for and with each other in these difficult life transitions.
well, it's great to again have someone like you out there to help people through this. It's good because it is. an extremely difficult process for most people. And so it's nice to have someone out there to be able to help them and advise them properly so that they can get through it with the least amount of damage, to say the least. So
That's right. And also to remember, as difficult as it is, it adds to our wisdom, it adds to our life experience. You know, the light gets in where the cracks are, and we actually do better later for these experiences. So, not viewing it always as, you know, we suffered for no good reason. We learn from it, and we can do better because of it, even if we make mistakes. So, there's always hope on the other side.
absolutely. Well, Cheri, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I appreciate all your wisdom. And I'll make sure everybody that the links that for her website are going to be in the other site. I'll make sure those links are posted below on both the podcast platforms as well as YouTube. So thank you so much for being here, and folks, thank you for joining us. And until next time, stay safe, be careful, and love yourself so you can love others. Bye.